She was just a 19-year-old mechanic who fixed the engines and changed the oil. The tank crew barely noticed her working in the motor pool, covered in grease, hair tied back, speaking only when spoken to. But when the last operational tank on the base needed a driver, and enemy forces were closing in, the person who climbed into that commander's hatch wasn't who anyone expected. What Corporal Viper Kane did next would become legend in armored warfare history. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. You make this community what it is. Forward operating base Titan sat like a steel and concrete island in the endless desert of western Iraq. Its perimeter walls scorched by years of incoming mortar fire, and its guard tower scarred by sniper bullets. It was 2009, and the base housed a mechanized infantry battalion that had been conducting counterinsurgency operations for 8 months. The motor pool at FOB Titan was where battalion's M1A2 Abrams tanks received maintenance repairs, and the constant attention needed to keep 70-ton war machines operational in an environment that seemed designed to destroy anything mechanical. In the corner of that motor pool, usually covered in hydraulic fluid and engine grease, worked Corporal Viper Kane. At 19 years old, Viper had been in the Army for less than 2 years, but she had grown up around heavy machinery on her family's construction business in rural Montana. Her hands knew the language of engines and hydraulics with an intuition that had impressed even the most experienced mechanics in the battalion. She could diagnose a transmission problem by the sound it made, could spot a hydraulic leak before it showed up on any gauge, and could strip down an engine and rebuild it faster than men who had been doing the job for a decade. But Viper Kane had never driven a tank in combat. She had never fired the main gun. She had never commanded a crew in battle. According to her military occupational specialty, she was a 91A Abrams tank system maintainer, a mechanic, not a tanker. The tank crews who brought their vehicles to her for repair treated her with the casual respect that soldiers show to people who keep their equipment running. But they never saw her as one of them. She was support personnel, not a combat soldier. She fixed their tanks. They fought in them. That was the natural order of things in their world. What none of them knew was that Viper Kane had been absorbing everything about tank operations from the moment she arrived at FOB Titan. While she worked on the engines, she listened to the crews discussing tactics and procedures. When she performed maintenance on the fire control systems, she studied the ballistic computers and targeting mechanisms. During her off-duty hours, she read technical manuals that most mechanics never bothered with, manuals about gunnery, about armor tactics, about the employment of tanks in combined arms operations. She had never told anyone about the hours she spent in the simulator that was used to train new tank crews, slipping in after duty hours when the training bay was empty. She had never mentioned that she had memorized the procedures for operating every system in the M1A2 Abrams, from the main gun to the commander's independent thermal viewer. It wasn't that Viper was planning to become a tanker. She was simply fascinated by the machines she worked on and wanted to understand them completely. To her, an Abrams tank wasn't just a collection of mechanical systems to be maintained. It was a weapon system of incredible complexity and power, and she wanted to know how every part of it functioned. The morning of October 15th, 2009, started like any other at FOB Titan. Viper was in the motor pool before dawn, checking the status of the 4 Abrams tanks that were scheduled for maintenance. 3 of them had minor issues: a hydraulic leak on one, a faulty radio on another, a track tension problem on the third. The 4th tank, designated Thunder 7, had a more serious problem. Its engine was showing signs of imminent failure and needed to be completely rebuilt. By 800 hours, Viper was elbow deep in Thunder 7's engine compartment, working to remove the massive AGT 1500 turbine engine that powered the 70-ton beast. It was a job that normally required a full crew of mechanics and could take several days to complete. But Viper worked with the focused intensity of someone who genuinely enjoyed solving complex mechanical problems. She was so absorbed in her work that she almost didn't hear the incoming mortar rounds. The first explosion hit the perimeter wall on the north side of the base, sending a shockwave through the ground that Viper felt through the tank's armor. By the time the second and third rounds impacted, The base's alarm system was screaming, and soldiers were running for defensive positions. But this wasn't the usual harassment fire that FOB Titan received almost daily. This was the beginning of a coordinated attack by insurgent forces that had been planning and preparing for months. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, the tank platoon sergeant, came sprinting into the motor pool with his combat gear hastily thrown on and his weapon ready. "Kane!" he shouted over the sound of incoming fire. "We need to get these tanks battle-ready now." Viper emerged from Thunder 7's engine compartment, her uniform covered in grease and hydraulic fluid. "Sergeant, Thunder 7 is deadlined. The engine is pulled, and I'm at least 2 days from having it operational." Rodriguez cursed under his breath. The battalion had deployed with 4 tanks, but now one was completely inoperable just when they needed every available weapon. "What about the other 3? He demanded. "Thunder 4 has a hydraulic leak in the turret traverse system, but it's still operational. Thunder 6 has radio problems, but everything else is good. Thunder 2 is fully mission capable." As if summoned by their conversation, explosions began erupting closer to the motor pool. This wasn't random mortar fire. This was accurate, targeted bombardment designed to destroy the base's heavy weapons before ground assault. Sergeant Corporal Davis, one of Rodriguez's tank commanders, came running into the motor pool. "We got problems. Johnson took shrapnel from that last mortar round. He's down. And Williams is in the aid station with what looks like a concussion from when Thunder 4 threw a track yesterday." Rodriguez felt his stomach sink. With Johnson and Williams out of action, he was down 2 tank commanders and had only 3 operational tanks. But the attack was intensifying, and area reconnaissance was reporting a large force of insurgent vehicles approaching the base from multiple directions. "Sir," another soldier came running up. "Colonel wants all available tanks on the line immediately. Enemy armor has been spotted. Looks like they've got some kind of captured Iraqi equipment, maybe old T-55s. Rodriguez made quick calculations in his head. 3 tanks, but only 2 experienced commanders available. The 3rd tank would need to be operated by someone without full combat experience, but there was no choice. The base's survival might depend on getting every available weapon into the fight. "Kane," Rodriguez said, turning to Viper, "I need you to drive Thunder 2. Jackson will command, but we need every body we can get." Viper felt her heart racing. She had never driven a tank in combat, had never been anything but a passenger during the few test drives she had participated in. But she could see the desperation in Rodriguez's eyes, and she knew that the situation was beyond the normal protocols and procedures. "Roger, Sergeant," she said simply. But as they prepared to move the tanks to defensive positions, another explosion rocked the motor pool. This one close enough to shatter windows and rain concrete debris down on them. When the dust cleared, Sergeant Jackson was on the ground, blood streaming from a head wound caused by falling concrete. Rodriguez knelt beside Jackson, checking his condition. The tank commander was conscious but clearly concussed, unable to focus his eyes or respond coherently to questions. "Damn it," Rodriguez muttered. "Kane, how much do you actually know about tank operations?" Viper hesitated for a moment, then decided that this wasn't the time for false modesty. "Everything, Sergeant. I know every system, every procedure, every technical manual. I've been studying tank operations since I got here." Rodriguez stared at her. "Have you ever fired the main gun?" "In the simulator? Yes, hundreds of times." "Combat experience?" "No, Sergeant. But I know the tank better than anyone except maybe you." Rodriguez was facing an impossible decision. Protocol demanded that tanks be operated only by fully trained and certified crew members. But Protocol hadn't anticipated a situation where half his tank commanders were casualties and enemy armor was approaching the base. Another explosion, this one even closer, made the decision for him. "Kane, you're now the commander of Thunder 2. Get that tank operational and get it to the defensive line. Figure out the crew positions when you get there." Viper felt a surge of adrenaline and terror that almost paralyzed her. In the space of 5 minutes, she had gone from being a mechanic to being responsible for a 70-ton weapon system worth $4 million, and more importantly, for the lives of whatever crew she could assemble. Roger, Sergeant, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. As Rodriguez ran off to coordinate the other tanks, Viper looked around the motor pool for available crew members. Most of the tank crews were already assigned to the other vehicles, but she spotted two soldiers she recognized. Specialist Torres, a loader from one of the tanks that was in for maintenance, and Private First Class Kim, a driver who had been injured in a training accident the week before, but was now clear for duty. Torres. Kim, she called out. You're with me on Thunder 2. Both soldiers looked surprised to be taking orders from the 19-year-old mechanic, but the sound of incoming fire and the urgency in Viper's voice left no room for questions. Kane, Torres said as they approached the tank, I thought you were maintenance. Today I'm whatever this tank needs me to be, Viper replied, climbing onto Thunder 2 and dropping to Commander's hatch. The interior of the tank was familiar to Viper from her maintenance work, but sitting in the commander's position felt completely different. The periscopes gave her a 360-degree view around the tank. The radio systems crackled with traffic from other units, and the fire control system hummed with electronic precision. She was no longer looking at these systems as components to be repaired. She was seeing them as tools of war. Kim, driver's position, she ordered. Torres, you're loading. Kim, have you driven an Abrams before? Yes, Corporal. 2 years experience. Good. Torres, loading procedures. Standard, Corporal. I can keep you fed with whatever you need. Viper took a deep breath and keyed the radio. Thunder Base, this is Thunder 2. Tank is operational and moving to defensive positions. The response came immediately from Rodriguez. Thunder 2, proceed to grid 338 to 442. Enemy armor approaching from the northeast. Engage targets of opportunity. As Kim fired up the massive turbine engine, Viper felt the tank come alive beneath her. The vibration, the sound, the sense of raw power was unlike anything she had experienced during her maintenance work. This wasn't a machine being tested. This was a weapon preparing for combat. Thunder 2 rolled out of the motor pool and onto the base's main road, its tracks chewing at the pavement as Kim maneuvered toward their assigned defensive position. Through her periscopes, Viper could see soldiers running for cover, smoke rising from several buildings that had been hit by mortar fire, and the distinctive muzzle flashes of enemy weapons in the distance. Thunder 2. This is Thunder 4, came Rodriguez's voice over the radio. I have eyes on enemy armor. Count 3. Possibly 4 tanks approaching from grid 341 to 445. Appears to be T-55s, or similar. You are cleared to engage. Viper felt her mouth go dry. This was it. The moment when all her theoretical knowledge would be tested in actual combat. She activated the tank's thermal imaging system and began scanning the horizon for targets. Contact, she announced over the intercom. Tank, bearing 045, range approximately 2,800 meters. Through the thermal sight, she could see the heat signature of an enemy tank moving across the desert toward FOB Titan. It was an older Soviet-designed T-55, probably captured from Iraqi army stocks and pressed into service by insurgent forces. Compared to the Abrams, it was lightly armored and equipped with an obsolete fire control system, but was still a tank with a main gun that could cause serious damage to the base. Viper activated the fire control system and began the target engagement sequence that she had practiced hundreds of times in simulation. The ballistic computer calculated range, wind, and ammunition type. The thermal sight locked onto the target. The main gun elevation and traverse motors hummed as they positioned the 120 mm cannon. Identified tank, she called out, following the standard gunnery procedures. Sabo loaded? Sabo up, Torres confirmed from the loader's position. Fire, Viper ordered. The main gun erupted with sound like thunder, the depleted uranium penetrator screaming downrange at over a mile per second. Through her sight, Viper watched the round impact the enemy tank dead center, the kinetic energy of the projectile punching through the T-55's armor like paper and igniting its ammunition storage. The enemy tank disappeared in a massive explosion that sent flames and debris hundreds of feet into the air. Target destroyed, Viper reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Holy shit, Kane, Torres said over the intercom. That was a perfect shot. But there was no time to celebrate. The thermal sight was already showing 2 more enemy tanks approaching from a different direction, and the radio was crackling with reports of infantry movement all around the base perimeter. Thunder 2, this is Thunder Base. Rodriguez's voice came to the radio. Outstanding shot. Continue to engage targets of opportunity. Be advised, we have reports of enemy infantry with RPGs moving toward your position. Viper began scanning for the next target, while simultaneously monitoring the radio traffic from the other defensive positions around the base. The battle was developing rapidly, with enemy forces attacking from multiple directions in what appeared to be a coordinated attempt to overrun FOB Titan. Contact, second tank, she announced. Bearing 078, range 2,400 meters. This target was closer and moving faster. Try to use the terrain to mask its approach to the base. But the Abrams thermal imaging system could see through smoke and dust, and Viper's gunnery training had taught her to engage moving targets with precision. Tank identified. Sabo loaded. Sabo up. Fire. The second shot was as accurate as the first. The enemy tank exploding in a fireball that sent smoke billowing across the desert. But as Viper searched for additional targets, her gunner's sight picked up something that made her blood run cold. Thunder Base Thunder 2, she transmitted. I have eyes on a large formation of enemy vehicles approaching from grid 344 to 448. Count approximately 20 vehicles, mix of trucks and armor. This looks like a major assault force. Rodriguez's response was immediate and tense. Thunder 2, we see them. All Thunder elements. Prepare for sustained engagement. This is the main attack. As the enemy formation approached, Viper realized that the 3 operational Abrams tanks at FOB Titan were about to face odds of nearly 7-1. The enemy had more vehicles, more personnel, and the advantage of choosing when and where to attack. But the American tanks had better armor, better fire control systems, and better training. And they had something else. They were fighting to protect their home base and their fellow soldiers. Kim, Viper said over the intercom, I need you to keep us moving. Never stay in one position for more than 2 shots. Torres, keep me fed with Sabo rounds until I tell you otherwise. Roger, Corporal. Both crew members responded. What followed was 30 minutes of the most intense tank combat that any of them had ever experienced. Viper engaged target after target, her shots guided by hours of simulator training and an intuitive understanding of the tank's capabilities that came from months of working on its mechanical systems. She knew exactly how the main gun would respond to different ammunition types, exactly how the fire control system compensated for range and movement, exactly how to position the tank to maximize their advantages while minimizing their exposure to enemy fire. Thunder 2 destroyed 6 enemy vehicles during that engagement, 4 tanks and 2 armored personnel carriers. But more importantly, Viper's aggressive maneuvering and accurate gunnery broke up the enemy formation and prevented them from mounting a coordinated assault on the base perimeter. When the firing finally stopped and the enemy forces withdrew, leaving burning vehicles scattered across the desert, Viper sat in commander's position feeling exhausted, exhilarated, and slightly shocked by what had just happened. Thunder 2, this is Thunder Base. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio. Return to base for refit and debrief. Outstanding performance out there. As Thunder 2 rolled back into FOB Titan, Viper could see soldiers gathering to watch the tank that had been operated by the 19-year-old mechanic. Word had already spread throughout the base about what she had accomplished, and she could see the mixture of amazement and respect in their faces. But it wasn't until she climbed out of the tank and saw Staff Sergeant Rodriguez waiting for her that the full magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. Kane, Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a tone she had never heard from him before. That was some of the finest tank gunnery I've ever witnessed. 6 confirmed kills, textbook maneuvering, perfect communication. Where the hell did you learn to do that? Viper pulled off her CVC helmet, her hair matted with sweat and her face streaked with dust and cordite residue. I learned it here, Sergeant. Watching, listening, studying. I learned it from you and the other tank commanders, from the technical manuals, from every minute I spent working on these machines. Rodriguez stared at her for a long moment. Kane, you realize that what you did today changes everything, right? You can't go back to being just a mechanic after proving that you can command a tank in combat better than most officers I've known. Viper looked back at Thunder 2, its armor scorched by enemy fire, and its main gun still radiating heat from the engagement. The tank that she had spent months maintaining and repairing had become, for 30 minutes, an extension of her will and her determination to protect her fellow soldiers. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "I never wanted to be just a mechanic. I wanted to be whatever these tanks needed me to be." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Well, Kane, I think they need you to be a tank commander. And based on what I saw today, I think the Army needs you to be a tank commander too." 3 weeks later, Corporal Viper Kane received orders transferring her from the 91A military occupational specialty to 19K, armor crewman. The paperwork was signed by a colonel who had flown to FOB Titan specifically to meet the 19-year-old mechanic who had become a tank ace in a single engagement. But more importantly, Viper received something that couldn't be captured in official paperwork: the respect and recognition of her fellow soldiers who had witnessed her transformation from maintenance personnel to combat leader. The story of her performance during the Battle of FOB Titan, as it came to be known, spread throughout the armor community and eventually became a case study taught at the armor school at Fort Knox. Not because of the tactical situation or the enemy forces involved, but because it demonstrated something important about leadership, about potential, and about the value of truly understanding the tools of your trade. Viper Kane had spent months learning every detail about tank operations, not because she planned to become a tank commander, but because she was genuinely fascinated by the machine she worked on. When the moment came to put that knowledge to use, she was ready not just technically, but mentally and emotionally. But the story of Viper Kane's transformation from mechanic to tank ace was far from over. What happened in the weeks following the Battle of FOB Titan would prove that her performance wasn't a one-time fluke, but the emergence of a natural-born tank commander who had been hiding in plain sight. The day after the battle, Colonel Patricia Mason arrived at FOB Titan via helicopter, accompanied by a team of officers from the 1st Armored Division headquarters. Mason was a career armor officer who had commanded tank units in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and she had come specifically to debrief the soldiers involved in the previous day's action. But she had also come to meet the 19-year-old mechanic whose performance had been described to her as unprecedented and tactically perfect by multiple witnesses. Viper was in the motor pool, working on Thunder 4's hydraulic system, when Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found her. "Kane," Rodriguez said, "clean up and report to the briefing room. The colonel wants to see you." Viper felt her stomach tighten. She had spent the night replaying every moment of the battle, wondering if she had made mistakes that might have cost lives or damaged equipment. Being summoned to meet a colonel usually meant either commendation or court-martial, and she wasn't sure which to expect. 20 minutes later, she stood at attention in the base's briefing room, facing Colonel Mason and 3 other officers she didn't recognize. Mason was a compact woman in her 40s, with graying hair and the kind of direct gaze that came from years of command responsibility. "At ease, Corporal Kane," Mason said. "Have a seat." Viper sat down, her hands clasped in her lap, waiting for whatever was coming. "Kane," Mason began, "I've reviewed the after-action reports from yesterday's engagement, and I've spoken with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and the other tank commanders who witnessed your performance. What you accomplished is being described as some of the finest tank gunnery and tactical maneuvering that any of these officers have ever seen." Viper remained silent, unsure of how to respond. "But I'm not here just to congratulate you," Mason continued. "I'm here because what you did yesterday raises some serious questions about how we identify and develop talent in the armored force." Mason opened a folder and pulled out several documents. "According to your personnel file, you've been in the Army for 18 months. Your military occupational specialty is 91A, Tank System Maintainer. You've never attended the Armor Basic Officer Leader course, never been to the Advanced Gunnery course, never had formal training as a tank commander. Yet, yesterday, you outperformed tank commanders with years of experience and formal training." Mason looked directly at Viper. "How do you explain that?" Viper took a breath before responding. "Ma'am, I've been studying tank operations since I arrived at this unit. I've read every technical manual, every tactical publication, every after-action report I could get my hands on. I've spent hundreds of hours in the gunnery simulator, and I've listened to every conversation the tank crews have had about tactics and procedures. Why? Mason asked. You were assigned as a mechanic. Why go beyond your job requirements? Viper hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. Because I wanted to understand the machines I was working on, ma'am. I didn't want to just fix problems. I wanted to understand how every system contributed to the tank's mission. And the more I learned, the more fascinated I became with the tactical employment of armor. Mason exchanged glances with the other officers. Kane, what do you know about target engagement procedures for moving targets at extended range? For the next hour, Mason and her team put Viper through an informal examination that covered everything from basic gunnery principles to advanced tactical concepts. They asked her about ballistics, about armor tactics, about maintenance procedures, about leadership principles. And with each question, it became increasingly clear that Viper's knowledge went far beyond what anyone would expect from a mechanic with 18 months of service. Kane, Mason said finally, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Do you want to be a tank commander? Viper felt her heart racing. This was the opportunity she had never dared to hope for, the chance to officially become what she had always felt she was meant to be. Yes, ma'am, she said without hesitation. More than anything. Mason nodded. Good, because I'm recommending you for immediate reclassification to 19K, Armor Crewman. You'll attend an abbreviated armor course to get the formal certifications you need, but based on what I've seen, you're already qualified to command a tank. But Mason wasn't finished. There's something else, Kane. Your performance yesterday didn't just impress the officers at this base. Word has reached some very senior people in the armor community, and there's interest in having you participate in some specialized training programs. Viper looked confused. What kind of specialized training, ma'am? The kind that's designed for soldiers who show exceptional aptitude for armored operations. The kind that might lead to assignments with some very elite units. Mason stood up, and Viper immediately came to attention. Kane, report to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez for your new duty assignment. As of today, you're the commander of Thunder 2. Use the next few weeks to train your crew and prepare for our next mission. I have a feeling you're going to be very busy. As Viper left the briefing room, her mind was reeling from the speed at which her life was changing. 24 hours ago, she had been a mechanic. Now she was officially a tank commander, with the possibility of even more advanced opportunities ahead. But she didn't have long to process these changes. 2 days later, FOB Titan received intelligence that a large insurgent force was planning another attack, this one even more coordinated and dangerous than the previous assault. All tank commanders. Briefing room. 1,400 hours. Rodriguez announced over the base's communication system. When Viper entered the briefing room, she found herself sitting alongside the other tank commanders as an equal for the first time. Staff Sergeant Thompson, who commanded Thunder 4, nodded at her with a kind of professional respect that had to be earned. Sergeant First Class Williams, who had recovered from his concussion and resumed command of Thunder 6, actually smiled at her. All right, listen up, Rodriguez began, pointing to a map of the area around FOB Titan. Intelligence indicates that the enemy is planning a major assault for tomorrow night. This isn't going to be like the last attack. They're bringing more vehicles, more personnel, and they've had time to study our defensive positions. Rodriguez pointed to several locations on the map. We're expecting attacks from 3 directions simultaneously. The enemy has learned from their previous failure, and they're planning to use multiple axes of advance to divide our attention and overwhelm our defenses. Viper studied the map, her mind automatically beginning to calculate fields of fire, engagement ranges, and tactical options. It was a habit she had developed during her months of studying armor tactics, but now she was applying it as an actual tank commander rather than a theoretical exercise. Kane, Rodriguez said, Thunder 2 will be positioned here, covering the eastern approach. You'll have the longest engagement ranges, but also the most likely avenue of enemy advance. Viper nodded. Roger, Sergeant. What's the expected enemy composition? Mix of armor and infantry. Probably more T-55s. possibly some BTR-60s or similar APCs. And definitely RPG teams try and get close enough for infantry assault. As the briefing continued, Viper found herself contributing to the tactical discussion with insights that surprised even herself. Her months of study and her natural understanding of armor operations were combining with her recent combat experience to produce tactical thoughts that were both innovative and practical. Kane, Thompson said during a break in the briefing, "Where did you learn to think like that? That idea about using reverse slope positions to mask our thermal signatures. That advanced stuff." Viper shrugged. "I read about it in a tactical publication about tank employment in desert environments. It seemed like it might be applicable here." Williams laughed. "Kane, most tank commanders don't read tactical publications, unless they're forced to. You're reading them for fun." "Something like that," Viper replied. "The attack came just after midnight, and it was everything that intelligence had predicted and more. Enemy forces approached from 3 directions simultaneously, using coordinated fire and movement to try to overwhelm the base's defenses. But this time, FOB Titan was ready. From her position covering the eastern approach, Viper had an excellent view of the enemy's main axis of advance. Through her thermal sight, she could see a column of vehicles moving across the desert. For tanks, 6 APCs and multiple trucks carrying infantry. "Thunder 2, this is Thunder Base." Rodriguez's voice came over the radio. "You have the largest enemy formation approaching your sector. Engage at maximum effective range." Viper had been tracking the lead enemy tank since it appeared on her thermal sight, calculating range and wind conditions. At 3,200 meters, it was at the edge of effective range of the Abrams main gun, but the conditions were perfect for a long-range engagement. Torres, "Sabo loaded," she called to her loader. "Sabo up, ready to fire." "Identify tank," Viper announced, following the standard engagement sequence. "Range 3,200. Fire." The main gun erupted, and through her thermal sight, Viper watched the depleted uranium penetrator streak across the desert and strike the enemy tank center mass. The vehicle exploded in a massive fireball that illuminated the entire area. "Target destroyed," she reported, engaging second target. What followed was a masterclass in long-range tank gunnery. Over the course of 20 minutes, Viper engaged and destroyed 7 enemy vehicles at ranges from 2,800 to 3,400 meters. Her shooting was so accurate and so devastating that the enemy formation broke up and began withdrawing before they ever got close enough to pose a serious threat to the base. But it was her tactical maneuvering during the engagement that really impressed the other tank commanders. Rather than remaining static in her initial position, Viper had repositioned Thunder 2-3 times during the battle, using terrain features to mask her movement and present unexpected angles of attack to the enemy. "Thunder 2, this is Thunder 4. Thompson's voice came over the radio during a lull in the fighting. "Outstanding shooting. Where did you learn to maneuver like that?" "Tactical Manual TM 17-15-7, Viper replied. "Tank employment in desert terrain." Page 47 discusses using reverse slope positions to achieve tactical surprise. There was a pause on the radio before Thompson responded. "Kane, you're quoting technical manuals in the middle of a firefight. That's either really impressive or really weird." "Both," Viper replied, already scanning for her next target. By the time the engagement ended, Thunder 2 had destroyed 7 enemy vehicles without taking a single hit in return. Viper had demonstrated not just exceptional gunnery skills, but tactical awareness and leadership abilities that far exceeded what anyone would expect from a 19-year-old with less than 2 years of military service. The morning after the battle, Viper was performing post-combat maintenance on Thunder 2 when she noticed a convoy of vehicles approaching the base. As they got closer, she could see that they weren't standard military vehicles. They were the kind of unmarked, heavily modified trucks that usually meant the arrival of special operations personnel. "Kane," Rodriguez called out, "clean up and report to the briefing room. You have visitors." When Viper entered the briefing room, she found 3 men in civilian clothes waiting for her. They carried themselves with the confidence of experienced soldiers, but their lack of rank insignia and their civilian attire suggested they were from one of the military's more secretive organizations. Corporal Kane, the senior man, said, "My name is Davidson. We're here to discuss some opportunities that might interest you." Viper remained standing until Davidson gestured for her to sit down. "Kane, your performance in the past week has attracted attention at some very senior levels," Davidson continued. "2 major engagements, 13 confirmed vehicle kills, 0 friendly casualties. Those are numbers that put you in the same category as some of the most successful tank commanders in military history." Davidson opened a briefcase and pulled out a folder marked with security classifications that Viper had never seen before. "We represent a joint task force that specializes in armored operations in unconventional situations. The kind of operations that require tank commanders with exceptional skills and the ability to operate independently with minimal support." Viper felt her pulse quickening. This sounded like the kind of elite assignment that she had never imagined would be available to someone with her background and experience level. "What kind of operations?" she asked. Davidson smiled. "The kind we can't discuss in detail unless you agree to participate. But I can tell you that they involve working with some of the most advanced armored vehicles in the military inventory, and that successful completion would lead to opportunities that most tank commanders never even know exist." He pulled out another document. "This is a letter of recommendation from Colonel Mason, countersigned by the commanding general of 1st Armored Division. It recommends you for immediate assignment to our task force, with advancement to sergeant and specialized training that would make you one of the most qualified tank commanders in the military." Viper stared at the documents, hardly believing what she was seeing. 6 months ago, she had been a mechanic who dreamed of someday becoming a tank commander. Now she was being offered the chance to join an elite unit that operated at the highest levels of military capability. "What would I need to do?" she asked. "Complete a specialized training program. That would take about 6 months. Learn to operate equipment that you've never seen before. Prove that you can handle missions that push the boundaries of what armored forces are capable of accomplishing." Davidson leaned forward. "Kane, I'm going to be direct with you. What you accomplished in the past week isn't normal. Most tank commanders spend years developing the skills you seem to have developed intuitively. That suggests that you have natural abilities that could be developed far beyond what's possible in conventional units." He pulled out one final document. "This is your choice, Kane. You can stay here, continue as a conventional tank commander, and have a successful military career. Or you can take a chance on something that could transform you into a different kind of soldier entirely." Viper looked at the documents, then at the 3 men who were offering her an opportunity that seemed almost too good to be true. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "You don't," Davidson replied. "The decision has to be made now. If you're interested, you'll leave with us today. If not, we'll disappear and this conversation never happened." Viper thought about the past week, about the way she had felt when Thunder 2's main gun had fired in anger, about the satisfaction of outmaneuvering and outfighting an enemy that had underestimated her capabilities. "I'm interested," she said. Davidson smiled and stood up. "Outstanding. Gather your personal gear. We leave in 1 hour." As Viper left the briefing room to pack her belongings, she encountered Staff Sergeant Rodriguez in the hallway. "Kane," Rodriguez said, "I don't know what just happened in there, but I can guess. These kind of opportunities don't come along often." Viper nodded. "Sergeant, I want to thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself. If you hadn't put me in Thunder 2 that first day..." Rodriguez held up a hand to stop her. "Kane, I didn't give you anything. You earned everything that's happened to you. You earned it by studying when other people were sleeping, by caring about your job when other people were just putting in time, and by being ready when the moment came." He extended his hand. "Good luck, Kane. Something tells me this isn't the last time we'll hear about what you accomplish." An hour later, Viper was sitting in the back of an unmarked helicopter, flying toward an unknown destination and an uncertain future. But for the first time since joining the Army, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, 5 years later, the story of Viper Kane's rapid rise from mechanic to elite tank commander had become legend within the armored community. Details of her assignments after leaving FOB Titan remain classified, but rumors circulated about a young tank commander who had participated in operations that pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible with armored vehicles. What wasn't classified was a training program that had been developed based on her experience. The Kane Protocol, as it came to be known, was a system for identifying soldiers with exceptional potential for armored operations, regardless of their official military occupational specialty or formal training background. The program recognized that the best tank commanders weren't necessarily the ones who fit traditional profiles, but the ones who combined natural ability with genuine passion for understanding armored warfare. It looked for soldiers who studied beyond their job requirements, who showed tactical instincts that couldn't be taught, and who demonstrated the kind of calm courage that was essential for success in high-stress combat situations. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been promoted and assigned to the armor school at Fort Knox, often told the story of Viper Kane to new classes of tank commanders, not as an example of what they should try to become, but as a reminder that excellence could emerge from unexpected places, and that the military's most valuable assets were often hiding in plain sight. The lesson of Viper Kane, Rodriguez would tell his students, isn't that mechanics can become tank commanders. It's that if you truly understand your equipment, if you study your profession with genuine passion, and if you're ready to step up when the moment demands it, there's no limit to what you can accomplish. And somewhere in a classified facility conducting operations that officially didn't exist, a young woman who had once been told she was just a mechanic was proving that the most dangerous thing in the world might be someone who truly knows how their weapons work. Because sometimes the person who can fix a machine is exactly the person you need to fight with it. And sometimes that person is capable of fighting in ways that redefine what the machine can do.